The summer sun hung low over the wide Montana plains, casting a warm golden light across the endless fields. The wind carried the scent of dry grass and warm earth. The sound of cattle lowing echoed through the open land, mixing with the creaking of the old wooden windmill near the barn. Samuel Whitaker wiped the sweat from his brow and leaned against the fence, his hat tilted low to block the sun. His hands were strong and worn from years of work, the kind of hands that had built fences, raised barns, and cared for animals without help. He was a man who had lived his life on the land. He owned one of the largest cattle ranches in the valley, but no one who saw him would call him a man of comfort. His clothes were simple, his boots dusty, and his heart quiet. Samuel had not always been alone. Once, years ago, there had been laughter in the house, warm lights in the windows at night, the sound of a woman humming softly while cooking supper, the smell of bread baking in the oven. But time has a way of changing things. Life on the frontier was never easy, and little by little that warmth had faded away, leaving only silence. He had gotten used to that silence. It was his companion now. Every morning he rose before the sun, worked with the animals, rode the fields, fixed broken fences, and returned home when the stars were already out. He spoke little, smiled rarely, and dreamed not at all. He thought his life was already written. Just work, quiet meals, and the sound of the wind. That was until the day Clara Monroe arrived. Clara had grown up not far from Samuel's land, on a small family farm that once thrived. Her father had been a kind man, her mother a gentle woman who believed in hope even when times were hard. But the drought had changed everything. The rain stopped coming. The earth cracked under the heat, and the fields that once grew golden wheat turned into dry dust. The cattle died one by one. Her father grew weaker with each passing day, and after he was gone, the world became colder. Her mother followed not long after. Clara was left alone with a few chickens, a tired horse, and a broken house. She tried everything to keep the farm alive, but sometimes willpower isn't enough against the weight of the world. When the final roof beam cracked during a storm, Clara sat in the corner of the kitchen and stared at the place that had once been filled with love. There was nothing left for her there. She packed her small bag the next morning. A few clothes, a photograph of her parents, a Bible, and a single silver pin her mother had given her. She looked once more at the farm that had been her home since childhood. Then she turned away. She climbed on her mare, a soft brown horse named Daisy, and began to ride toward Samuel Whitaker's ranch. Everyone in the valley knew who Samuel was. Some said he was proud. Others said he was just quiet. Many said he would die alone because he never looked for anyone after his loss. But Clara had made up her mind. She had no family, no land, and no safety. She needed a place where she could build a future. And deep down, she hoped Samuel might be the kind of man who would understand her pain without judging it. The ride was long and dusty. The summer wind pushed against her as she rode across open fields. Hawks circled overhead and the sun burned on her shoulders. But Clara didn't stop. She thought of her parents, of how her father had once said, "When the world closes one door, you must knock on another." And now, this was the only door left to knock on. By the time she reached the ranch, the sun was dipping toward the horizon. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink, the kind that makes the land look like a painting. Samuel stood near the barn, rolling up the last length of rope for the day. He didn't notice her at first. It was Daisy's soft hoofbeats that made him look up. When Samuel saw the young woman riding toward him, his brow furrowed in quiet surprise. He wasn't used to visitors. Not at this hour. Not at all, really. He lifted his hat a little, shading his eyes as she came closer. Clara slowed Daisy to a stop a few feet from the fence. She swung her leg over the saddle, landed on the dusty ground, and took a deep breath. Her heart was pounding hard. She had played this moment over in her mind all the way there, but now that it had come, the words felt heavy in her chest. Samuel stepped forward slowly, not unkindly, just carefully, the way a man does when he's not sure what he's walking into. "Evening," he said finally, his voice steady but quiet. "Evening," Clara replied, brushing the dust from her skirt. Her hands trembled slightly, but she stood tall. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. The air was still, except for the sound of the windmill creaking. Samuel could see the tiredness in her eyes, the kind that doesn't come from a single bad day but from many hard years. Clara could see the strength in his, The strength of a man who had built his life from the ground up and had carried pain without letting it break him. Then Clara spoke, her voice soft but clear. "I came here because I have nowhere else to go," she said. "My family farm is gone. I have nothing left. And I don't want to disappear into the world like a shadow." Samuel didn't speak. He just listened. Clara took another breath. She could have begged for shelter. She could have asked for food. But she had decided long before she reached the ranch that she would speak with dignity, not with desperation. She met his eyes and said, "I can work. I can cook, clean, tend to animals. I can take care of a home. I can stand by someone. I want to belong somewhere. If you let me stay, I'll help you build a life. I'll give everything I have to give." The words hung in the air between them, not desperate, not soft, but strong and honest. Samuel stared at her, feeling something stir inside him that he hadn't felt in years. A quiet ache, not of pain, but of remembering. He remembered what it was like to have someone beside him at the end of the day. He remembered laughter in the house. He remembered what hope used to feel like. Clara didn't flinch under his gaze. She didn't beg. She didn't look away. She stood tall, her shoulders back, her heart beating fast but steady. The ranch was big, too big for one man alone. Samuel had always known that, though he'd never admitted it to anyone. He had enough work for 3 people, maybe 4. He didn't need a stranger, but he needed help. He didn't want to trust someone again, but maybe he needed to. He finally spoke again. "Why me?" Clara's lips curved into a small, tired smile. "Because I've seen you, Mr. Whitaker. I've seen how you work. You're a good man, a strong one. You build things instead of tearing them down. I don't want to beg at some town corner. I'd rather build a life with someone who knows the value of it." There was no grand music, no sudden rush of romance. Just 2 people standing in the golden light of a fading summer day, both carrying their own weight, both realizing that life on the frontier was not meant to be lived alone. Samuel didn't give her an answer right away. He never rushed anything. He nodded once, slow and thoughtful. Then he looked toward the barn, then back at her. "You'll need a place to sleep," he said finally. "The house is old, but it's clean. You can stay in the spare room." For Clara, those simple words meant more than anything. It wasn't a promise of love. It wasn't a grand offer, but it was a door opening when every other door had closed. She nodded gratefully, holding her bag close. As the sun slipped behind the hills, Clara followed Samuel toward the house. The wooden porch creaked beneath their boots. Fireflies flickered in the growing dark. Inside, the house smelled faintly of cedar and old wood. It wasn't much, but it felt like safety. Samuel lit a lamp, and the warm glow filled the small kitchen. Clara stood quietly for a moment, taking it in. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't running from something. She was walking toward something new. Samuel handed her a cup of water and pointed toward the spare room. "Get some rest," he said simply. Clara nodded. "Thank you." Outside, the wind rustled the tall grass and the ranch settled into the night. 2 strangers had met at the edge of their own loneliness, and neither of them knew it yet. But their lives were about to change. Not with fireworks or grand gestures, but with steady, quiet steps. And sometimes in the wide, wild West, that was how the strongest stories began. The next morning, the sun rose gently over the ranch, painting the sky with soft orange and pink light. Birds sang from the fence posts, and the smell of dew hung in the air. Clara opened her eyes slowly, feeling the weight of a real roof over her head. It had been months since she had woken up in a place that felt safe. For a moment, she lay still, listening to the quiet rhythm of the ranch, the windmill turning, the cattle lowing softly in the distance, the faint sound of boots on wooden floors. Samuel was already awake, of course. Men like him rose with the dawn, not because they had to, but because the land demanded it. When Clara stepped out into the kitchen, she found him pouring water into a tin cup, his hat already on his head, ready for the day. "Morning," he said, his voice steady, calm. "Morning," she answered softly. She wasn't sure how to act yet. She was a guest in his home, and though he had offered her a room, this was still his world, his rhythm, his way. But Samuel wasn't a man who wasted words or made anyone feel unwelcome. He nodded toward the stove. "There's bread on the counter. Eat something before the day gets too hot," he said simply. Clara smiled a little and sat down at the small wooden table. She tore a piece of bread, still soft from the night before, and ate quietly as Samuel stepped outside to begin his work. From the kitchen window, she watched him walk toward the barn with calm, purposeful steps. He moved like someone who had lived on the land for so long that it had become a part of him. As she ate, Clara thought about everything she had said the night before, about asking to stay, about offering to build a life here. She had spoken from her heart, but now the weight of it settled over her. She wasn't a guest anymore. She had to prove that she could carry her share of the work, that she belonged here. After breakfast, she rolled up her sleeves, tied her hair back, and stepped outside. The air was warm and the field stretched out in all directions like a golden sea. Samuel was already saddling his horse. He glanced at her as she walked toward him. "You don't have to," he said quietly. "I want to," she replied, her voice steady. He didn't argue. He simply nodded once and handed her a smaller saddle. She didn't need an invitation to work. She needed a chance. And Samuel seemed to understand that. That day, Clara helped mend fences, carry water, and gather eggs. She brushed the horses and swept the porch, moving with quiet determination. She wasn't afraid of hard work. She had grown up on a farm. The land had shaped her just as much as it had shaped him. As the days turned into weeks, something unspoken began to grow between them. It wasn't rushed or loud. It was quiet, like the sound of the wind through the grass. Samuel didn't talk much, but when he did, Clara listened. Clara didn't push, but she was there every morning and every night working beside him. At first, their conversations were simple. "How many fences left to fix?" "3 more. "Will it rain this week?" "Looks like it." But slowly, those short exchanges began to stretch. Samuel started asking about her family. Clara told him stories about her father's jokes, her mother's warm cooking, the nights they sat around a lantern telling old frontier tales. She spoke softly, but with warmth. Samuel listened carefully. Then one evening, as the sky turned gold, Samuel began to share too. He told her about the early days when he first built the ranch, how every fence post had been set by his own hands. He spoke about the nights he almost gave up, when the storms were too strong and the cattle too few. And then, without intending to, he mentioned the woman he had lost. Clara didn't interrupt. She didn't offer empty comfort. She just listened, her eyes soft and understanding. And that was enough. The house began to change too. The silence that once filled its corners was replaced with the small, gentle sounds of living. Clara's laughter sometimes echoed from the kitchen. The smell of fresh bread and stew filled the rooms. The curtains she sewed with old cloth fluttered softly in the breeze. The house was no longer just a shelter. It was becoming a home again. Samuel noticed it. He noticed how her presence made everything lighter without trying. One late afternoon, after a long day of work, they sat on the porch together, sipping cool water. The sun was setting, bathing the land in a warm glow. The wind was calm and the fields looked like a sea of gold. "You've brought this place back to life," Samuel said quietly, looking out at the land. Clara glanced at him, surprised by his words. "I didn't do much," she replied softly. He shook his head. "You did more than you think." For a moment, neither spoke, but something unspoken passed between them, something gentle, real, and solid. As time went on, they became a team. During the spring roundup, Clara rode beside him, guiding cattle through the open range. When storms came, they worked together to protect the animals. When quiet evenings returned, they sat by the fireplace, sharing stories and warm silence. Samuel, who had once lived like the land itself, quiet, firm, unchanging, found himself waiting for her laughter. He caught himself looking for her in the mornings, listening for her footsteps in the kitchen. And Clara, who had once felt like a drifting leaf with nowhere to land, began to feel rooted again. Then came the night that changed everything. The sky was clear, and the stars were scattered across the heavens like diamonds. They sat on the porch, wrapped in a soft silence. Samuel spoke slowly, like a man choosing each word carefully. "I thought I'd spend the rest of my life alone," he admitted. I thought the land was all I'd ever have. Clara looked down at her hands, her heart beating fast. You don't have to be alone, she said softly. He turned to her then, really looking at her, not as a stranger, not as someone passing through, but as the woman who had quietly walked into his life and filled it with warmth. The wind rustled the grass gently, almost like it was listening. Samuel nodded slowly. No, I guess I don't. Life on the ranch after that felt different. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was steady. Every day began with the same sunrise, but it felt warmer now. Every night ended with the same stars, but they seemed to shine brighter. As months passed, the ranch grew stronger. Together, they planted a new garden near the porch. Clara hung new curtains in the house and filled the kitchen with fresh bread, vegetables, and warm soup. Samuel built a new fence, a bigger one. For the future he didn't even know he wanted before she came. And when the first child was born, their child, the house that had once been silent echoed with a new sound. A soft, sweet cry that filled the walls with life. Samuel held the tiny baby in his strong, work-worn hands, and his eyes softened in a way they hadn't in years. Clara looked at him, tired but glowing with quiet joy. In that moment, everything came full circle. What had begun with a single brave sentence on a dusty evening, "Take me, I will bear your children," had grown into something real, something strong. Word spread slowly through the valley about the rancher and the woman who came to his door with nothing but courage. Neighbors began to visit again. People spoke, kindly of them at the trading post, saying how the Whitaker ranch seemed warmer now, more alive. But for Samuel and Clara, it was never about what people said. It was about the quiet mornings when the sun rose over their land. It was about the laughter that now lived in the kitchen. It was about the trust that grew between them, not overnight, but slowly, like a seed pushing through hard earth until it became a strong tree. And so their story lived on, not in grand speeches or wild adventures, but in simple, everyday moments. Two people, once broken by life in different ways, had found each other in the wide, wild West. And in that quiet corner of the prairie, they built a future together, steady, warm, and real. Sometimes the greatest stories aren't the ones told with loud voices or grand gestures. They are the ones whispered by the wind, carried across the land, and remembered for their quiet strength.